The traditional approach to stroke rehabilitation and recovery focuses almost exclusively on the acute care and subacute care stages of the long stroke recovery journey. But from the stroke survivor's perspective, the community care stage of their stroke recovery journey is often the most difficult to cope with, not only because of the often severe psychological impact of a stroke on the survivor, carers and family members, but because of the difficulties they face in negotiating the excellent but sadly highly fragmented primary healthcare system and accessing appropriate community services. For most stroke survivors, their long stroke recovery journey commences when they are admitted into an acute care hospital with symptoms of a stroke. So the first stage of their recovery journey is the acute care stage, where the focus is on stabilising the survivor's medical condition and preparing them for rehabilitation. The second stage of the stroke recovery journey is the subacute care stage, where the focus is on providing rehabilitation services that enable the stroke survivor to be discharged to live safely in appropriate accommodation in the community. Then the third stage, and often by far the longest stage of the stroke recovery journey, is the community care stage, where the focus is on providing a range of medical and non-medical services that enable the stroke survivor to rebuild their post-stroke lives and regain an acceptable quality of life. So we will now focus on how the Stroke Rehab app supports the community care stage of the stroke recovery journey. This diagram identifies the main classes of data objects that represent the knowledge that stroke survivors and their carers need to know to navigate the full range of community-based medical and non-medical services once they are discharged back into their communities, whether they be living in metropolitan, regional or rural communities. These data objects need to be collected and maintained in the central database and distributed amongst various peripheral databases as required. It contains three groups of data objects, namely data objects that support the recording of geographic information about Australia, or any other country for that matter, information about for-profit and not-for-profit organisations that provide a huge range of stroke-related community or social services throughout Australia, and personal information about those Australians who become personally involved in one or more stroke recovery journeys, either as a stroke survivor, a carer or a family member. And this diagram identifies two more groups of data objects, namely data objects that support the recording of chronic disorder information, which outlines the recovery stages and service categories that are relevant to someone recovering from any chronic disorder, such as stroke. And service delivery information that records what services were actually offered by service providers and delivered to particular stroke survivors. Each of these data object classes described in this and the previous slide will now be described in more detail to show how the Stroke Rehab app will support the management of a stroke survivor's recovery journey. The first group of data object classes represent information about the geography or political structures that operate in a particular country. Firstly, there are country data objects that represent real countries with independent national governments, such as Australia. Then there are state data objects that represent independent state or regional governments within a particular country, such as the states of Victoria and New South Wales in Australia. The relationship between country objects and state objects can be expressed in the following statement. A country may contain many states, and a state must be contained in one country. Then there are municipality data objects that represent local government areas within a particular state. For example, the Boroondara municipality within the state of Victoria within the country of Australia. The relationship between municipality objects and state objects can be expressed in the following statement. A state may contain many municipalities, and a municipality must be contained in one state. There are locality data objects that represent the cities, towns, suburbs, villages, or rural areas within a particular municipality. But here we need to note that the boundary of a particular locality may span several municipalities. So the relationship between locality objects and municipality objects can be expressed in the following statement. A municipality may contain many localities, and a locality may be contained in many municipalities. Then there are block data objects that represent the places where residential or commercial buildings may be located. And here we need to recognise that a block may have many street addresses. For example, a block may have the equivalent addresses of 7 Flinders Street, Melbourne, and Young and Jackson's. So the relationship between block objects and locality objects can be expressed in the following statement. A locality may contain many blocks, and a block may be contained in one locality. In this way, the central database contains geographic information that is relevant to any service provider or consumer in any metropolitan, regional or rural community within Australia. The next group of data object classes represent information about the organisations that offer goods and services, including medical and non-medical services in communities throughout the country. Firstly, we need to differentiate between the legal entity, called an organisation, and the operational entity, called an office. So we define organisation data objects to identify the legal entities operating in the stroke recovery and rehabilitation industry, for example, the National Stroke Foundation. And we define office data objects to identify the operating entities that actually provide goods and or services to stroke survivors and their carers. For example, the organisation called the National Stroke Foundation has 3 offices. Its head office, located in Bourke Street, Melbourne, and regional offices located in Wellington Street, North Hobart, and Aberdare Road, Nedlands. Next, we need to recognise that each organisation may be classified in many different ways, including whether they are for-profit or not-for-profit organisations. They may also be classified by the type of product or service they offer, such as hospitals, medical clinics, or local government agencies. Then we must recognise that each organisation must have at least one office through which it delivers its services. This means that the products and services are offered by the office rather than the organisation. And each office must operate out of a commercial building which is located on a particular block. This fact is still relevant for an organisation that operates solely through the internet. For example, the NSF's head office operates from office space in a building on a block whose street address is Level 7, 461 Bourke Street, Melbourne, Victoria. Each office may be associated with many different street, postal, telephonic or electronic or email and website addresses that can be used by their clients and potential clients to obtain information, goods or services. Again, we can easily use the geographic information we talked about earlier, along with the office and block data, to determine which locality, which municipality, which state, and which country an organisation or office operates in. These data objects can be stored in the central database and distributed to various stakeholder databases as required. For example, it may be distributed to databases used by a survivor or to the databases used by stroke liaison officers.